This is the kickoff of the 6-part webinar series on how to analyze methodologies that's used to create environmental assets like offsets. And you can use this within the Guardian to digitize and verify this effort. I'm joined with Jaylene Molina, and we're going to be talking about a methodology breakdown of Verra VM17, which is the adoption of sustainable agricultural land management. If anyone is not familiar with Envision, we build applications in the Web3 space and have been open since the early part of 2018. For about a little bit over 2 years now, we've been the builders and the maintainers of the open source version of the Guardian. And just in case that you don't know what the Guardian is, we're just going to provide a really quick overview. So the Guardian is a solution that leverages the Hedera public ledger to create, mint emissions and carbon offset tokens. For example, it provides auditable, traceable, reproducible records that document the process and the life cycle of these digital environmental assets that I just discussed, such as carbon emissions and carbon offsets and renewable energy credits. It's aimed to reduce the fraud in the ESG market. And really, everything is all about the trust chain that you see here in the screenshot. So with every creation of a digital asset, we issue a verifiable presentation, which is a collection of more than one verifiable credentials. And essentially, this allows you to see from a public perspective, every action, every entity, everything that happened at what specific time and what specific place. And when we aggregate all this together, we call that the trust chain. Just diving into it a little bit deeper is that the process currently today of supporting the data for the carbon claims, it's manual, it's prone to errors, there's poor data quality, there's lack of assurance, double counting, greenwashing, etc. So this is where the Guardian really comes into play, that we leverage what we call a policy workflow engine. And this policy workflow engine, it can mirror the standards. For example, what we're going to discuss today, it can mirror these technical requirements of how to fulfill these sets of policies. Again, think of this policy workflow engine inside the Guardian as a coded instance of a methodology. So you can use this policy workflow like Legos to design your desired workflow. And Jaylene is going to show you a demo within the Guardian of the policy that we're going to be talking about today. And you'll see how these different actions wait for different entities to perform certain tasks. And that's how we know that when we're minting something, that it's verified. There are 2 versions available. The first version, obviously, is the open source Guardian. It's available to fork and use immediately. Go to github.com/hashgraph/Guardian. And then we also have our offering, which is the Managed Guardian service. It's live and it's free in beta right now. Go to guardianservice.io. And essentially, it's a hosted version of the open source Guardian. So if you don't want to manage all the different components, we provide the resources and the tools and support, and supported by 99.9% uptime SLAs. With that in mind, I'm going to pass this over to Jaylene.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. We're really excited to kick off this webinar, and this is going to be the first one out of a series of 6 that are going to be occurring every month until July. My name is Jaylene, and I'm an ESG consultant at Envision Blockchain. So we're going to start with this policy development checklist. We've broke down the steps that you're going to have to take, going from finding your methodology all the way to building the policy in Guardian. So we're going to start with this first one. First in the list is find out what type of credit you'll need. We have different types of credits out there that are VCUs, a verified carbon unit, VERs, a voluntary emission reduction, RECs, renewable energy credits, and there's more available out there. So once you figure out what credit type you'll need, depending on the project that you're interested in doing, or even if it's just a sample one that you want to work on, you need to find out what credit you're trying to mint. Your next step would be finding the appropriate standard body. There's registries like Verra, Gold Standard, Clean Development Mechanism, which is also known as CDM. Then you'll be looking for a methodology that fits in with your project. There's a list like the one on here on the side. this is how it would look like in Verra. You'd go down that list, find the one that best suits your project, or again, if you're doing a sample one that you're interested in. CDM also has a tab that has methodologies. You could find them there, and Gold Standard would have one as well. Then once you find the correct methodology, you want to read through that document and just get familiar with it. You'll start working on your schema, starting from the project proponent details all the way to the final calculation of credits. This is something that can be done in an Excel spreadsheet. There's also tools that you might come across that will be relevant to your methodology and can be implemented in the schemas, but that will be mentioned in the methodology document and will tell you where and when you would have to use that. Then you'll be creating a workflow. This workflow can help you answer who, what, and when. It's also going to be really important when you're going into Guardian. This workflow is just going to help you know what steps you have to take, and again, who is going to be taking a part within that step. Then you'll be building a policy for the Guardian. So now we're moving into VM0017. Which is also known as Adoption of Sustainable Agricultural Land Management. So this is going to be an introduction that's more specific for that methodology. This methodology is going to be estimating and monitoring greenhouse gas emissions of project activities that reduce emissions in agriculture through adoption of sustainable land management practices in the agricultural landscape. We decided to go with something within agriculture just because it's very popular within this ESG space right now. And because these projects are usually taking up a lot of space, like land, they're going to have a lot of credits that are associated to them. So this project is also used specifically to reduce emissions by using sustainable land management practices. We define these practices as anything that helps store more carbon in the soil, like using certain types of crops or adding trees to the area. This approach works best in areas where the amount of carbon in the soil would normally stay the same or decrease without the project. So in this webinar, we already went through the methodology development checklist, and now we're going to look at applicability, baseline and additionality, quantification, monitoring, workflow, and managed Guardian service. So the emission sources are something that usually we associate it with carbon dioxide, but these projects sometimes are looking at other GHG sources. So on that image on the right, you can see what it would look like in Verra, and it would tell you the source, the gas that is associated with that source, what's going to be included and excluded, and the reason why. So if it's included, it's going to tell you how it's being calculated and where it's coming from. For this specific project, it's going to be coming from the use of fertilizers, the use of N-fixing species, burning of biomass, and burning of fossil fuels. And we're looking at carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So the applicability for this project. The project must have activities that promote adoption of sustainable agriculture management practices on croplands or grasslands. The project proponent can choose from a list of different management practices like residue management, grassland management, agroforestry. It can be one or the other or all, depending on what you want to implement on the land that you're working on. There are also conditions. The land is either a cropland or grassland at the start of the project. The project doesn't occur on wetlands. The land is degraded and will continue to be degraded. The area of land under cultivation in the region is constant or increasing in the absence of the project. And forest land defined by CDM in the region is constant or decreasing over time. So this is also something that you're going to come across within that methodology document. It's going to tell you your applicability. So if you don't fall within that, then you would have to find a methodology that works best with your project. And now we're moving into how we quantify these things. We usually start in our schemas by having the project details, information about who's doing the project and what they're doing. And then we move into the baseline scenario. So what is the baseline scenario? For this specific one, it's land use and management prior to the implementation of a project activity. But in general, the baseline is going to be what happens if the project never took place. How are the baseline emissions and removals quantified? So in that green box, that's the main parameter that we're going to be looking for in this specific methodology. And the ones in the blue are what we're going to use to calculate that. So we're looking at baseline emissions from the use of nitrogen fertilizer, plus baseline emissions from the use of fossil fuels, plus baseline emissions from biomass burning. And then we'll be subtracting the baseline removals from woody perennials. To calculate these parameters, there are different tools that are mentioned within the methodology. So you can sometimes come across a CDM tool in a Verra methodology, but again, they will tell you when you'll have to use it and for what parameter. Now we have our project scenarios. So how we find out what emissions and removals we have within our project. The green is the parameter that we're looking for, and the blues are also going to be the ones that we're going to use to calculate that. So we have our project emissions from increased use of N-fixing species, plus all the ones that were within our baseline, but this time they're going to have values that are associated with the project. Then we'll be subtracting the project removals from woody perennials and subtracting project removals from changes in soil organic carbon. And this one also has tools that are associated with each parameter, and it would be mentioned within the methodology. This is our final equation for this methodology. The one in green is going to be very important for this final step because it's going to tell us how many VCUs we're going to be calculating for this project. So that net anthropogenic GHG emissions and removals is coming from our baseline equation, which was the first one that we looked at, subtracted by the project one, which was the second one. And then we'll be subtracting leakage. But for this specific example, we have a leakage of 0. Leakage would only take place if you are using biomass for cooking and heating. So an example can be using manure or agricultural residuals for heating and cooking. If this is included in the project, then the project proponent will have to calculate the estimates for possible leakage. Monitoring is what would come after you do your quantification. This is really updating those parameters. You could see in that bottom screenshot, we have what would be found within that Verra methodology document. You see the parameter and a description of what it is, how frequent you'll have to be updating that information, and the source that it would be coming from, and our workflow. So the workflow, again, is going to be very important when we move into Guardian. We'll know what steps we have to take and who is part of that step. So here we have it split into 3 different colors. The blue is your project proponent, orange is Verra, and green is the VVB. So starting from the beginning, the project proponent will be preparing and documenting the project description and submitting it to Verra. Verra will then add the project to the project pipeline, submit the project documents to the Verra project registry. Then the VVB will be assessing and validate the project description, provide a validation report, and the project proponent will then go in and conduct monitoring, sending a monitoring report to the VVB. The VVB will then review and deliver a verification report, verification representation, and a verification statement. And then Verra will review the VCU issuance request, and Verra will deposit the VCUs into the account and record it on the registry. This is the schema for VM0017. And on the top, we see required fields, schema type, question, allow multiple answers, and the answer. This is how we translate this into Guardian. We also have, depending on the schema type, it could be a string, which is information. You have your address, your phone numbers, your email, and this is all information coming from the project proponent. Now we're moving into our baseline. These top equations that are in green are being auto-calculated by the ones underneath them. Even though there are more here than what we saw in that presentation, it's because they're coming from those separate tools that we mentioned. So we have our removals from existing wooding perennials. Our main one is on the top, and it's using the bottom ones to calculate that number. Our baseline emissions from the use of fossil fuels in agriculture management. Again, the top one is the one we're looking at. and the bottom ones were coming from those tools to calculate that top number. Each one of these breaks is also what we would consider a schema. And then we're moving into our project emissions due to the use of N-fixing species. This was one of the parameters mentioned within that presentation. It was in the second equation, and then we're using the bottom one to calculate. Project emissions from burning of biomass. The specific project did not include burning of biomass, so we kept that at a 0. Project removals from woody perennials. This is calculating the emissions from fossil fuels for agriculture management. And now we're looking at our project equilibrium soil organic carbon density and management system. This information would be coming from a survey, coming from the farmers who own the land, and using a modeled, something like the Ross C model, to determine how much organic carbon we have in the soil. We keep going down. Now we're getting to our actual net GHG emissions and removals by sinks. These numbers are negative because there are more removals than emissions. And we break it down by year. And then this was that final equation. This is what we were looking for and what would tell you how many BCUs you'd be able to mint for that project depending on the year. So we see this number is the same as the calculation of BCUs in 2023. Now we're going to do a demo. So first we could look at the top. We have our profile, schemas, tokens, contracts, artifacts, policies. We could click on schemas. And we could see all those schemas that were within our Excel are here. If we click one of those, we see the information that's in there, the project removals, which is our schema name from woody perennials, the policy it belongs to, a description. If we scroll down, you can see the field type, which was where we saw a string, phone number. Here we have that this was a value, so it's a number. And all of these fields are auto-calculating to find that main parameter. Now we can move into policies. Here we have the policy that we were working on, VM0017, adoption of sustainable agriculture land management. And if you see here, it says in dry run. When we go in here, it's also going to say dry run. We use the dry run feature to run through a policy without sending any transactions to the Hedera network. It's a fast and cheap way to test the policy, so any tokens that you see that are minted here today are not going to be on chain. So starting with our users, we have one user, which is our administrator, and you see here it says standard registry. So by default, the administrator is going to be the standard registry. But as we saw in that workflow, we have 3 different roles, which is our standard registry, the project proponent, and a VB. So we'll have to create 2 users, 1 and 2. Now we have user 1 and 2. And if we click on user 1, we could assign a role to user 1. And we're going to assign project proponent. And we could click OK. And now we'll assign a role to user 2. We'll assign VVB. And we'll be giving that VVB a name. So now we see it says waiting for approval. We have to go back into our administrator, which is our standard registry, and approve this VB. We could see the document here of what the standard registry would be seeing on their side. We could hit approve. And now we could move into our project proponent. Now we see a new button that says New Project. We'll click on that. And here's all the information that was in that Excel and all the schemas. So for this demo, we're just going to be filling it with random information just to move it along faster. And we have to include a map. And now we're looking at our crediting period. So we're just going to put today's date. We'll put a year from today. Our monitoring period. Again, for the demo, we'll just be using this information. A year from today. And now we're getting into those main parameters. Our baselines. We'll be moving into the project information. Okay, and now we see the OK button turn blue, so all our fields have been filled in. We'll click OK. Now it says status waiting to be added. So we're going to our standard registry. We see approved VB, project pipeline, monitoring report, token history, trust chain. We're moving into our project pipeline. And we could click add. We'll see the document here that shows all the information that we just filled in. Some of these are auto-calculated since we described that in our schemas. And we could click add. Now we're waiting for validation, but before we get to validation, we'll have to assign a VBB. And this is going back into our project proponent. We can now assign our VBB. Now we're going to go to our VBB since it still says waiting for validation. Go into our projects tab. We have documents, projects, monitoring reports. We're currently in projects. And we see here we could validate or reject. The VBB can look at this document, go through all the information that was filled out. If it all looks good, you click validate. And now we'll be going back into our project proponent. And now we have some new buttons, which is add a report. We could view the report. So this is where you'd be updating all your new information, depending on when you have to update. So if it's annual, if it's every 5 years, that would have to be input here. Fill in all the new information. Scroll to the bottom and we'll see that we have to add a project area map. This would be an updated map as well. So now we could click OK. And now we'll be going to our VVB. Let's check in there. Monitoring report. And waiting for verification. So the VB can now see all the updated information. They'll see your new map at the bottom. And then they could click verify or reject if it doesn't look good. If it looks good, we'll click verify. Now we're moving to our standard registry. We could move into monitoring reports. And now we have the Mint button. So we could again view the document, see all the new information, saw that the VVB verified it, and we can click Mint. Now it says status minted. It moved from verified to minted, and we could look at our token history and see that we minted 1 token. Clicking here and view trust chain. So now we have our verified presentation. We have the token, the recipient name, the token amount, the mint date, verified signature. Now, if we scroll down, this is what Dan was showing us earlier. This is our trust chain. So we could see all the steps that were taken from the very beginning, who did what role. We could also click on these VC files and see what they saw at that time. And that would continue for every step that we took. We can see all of this, the user, all the way to our Mint VCUs. And we can see all that information. The amount, our token ID, our monitoring reports also have all that monitoring information. And one last thing to look at is when we click View Configuration. This is what we were mentioning earlier about our Lego blocks. So we could think of these blocks like Lego blocks, and they all have a purpose to complete this build. For this specific case, their purpose is to fulfill our policy requirements. All right, I hope that demo really helped clear some thoughts on how we get this work done. You could also reach out to us on GitHub, on Discord, and directly to Envision using our email or our website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jaylene, and thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you again next month.